The bargain. The sun hung low over the dusty frontier town, spilling amber light across weathered wood and restless faces. No music played, no laughter softened the air. Only the quiet murmur of witnesses gathered for a union that felt more like a transaction than a celebration. Elena Whitmore stood at the edge of the small wooden church, her fingers trembling around a fading bouquet of wildflowers. The petals were soft, fragile, like the life she felt slipping through her grasp. Her cream-colored dress brushed against the dirt, already stained at the hem, as though even the earth refused to keep it pure. This was not how she had imagined her wedding day. A few feet away stood Redhawk. He was still, almost unnervingly so, his tall frame outlined by the golden light. His dark hair was tied back neatly, his expression unreadable. He wore simple clothes, well-worn, practical, unadorned. A man shaped by labor, not luxury. The townspeople watched him with cautious eyes, whispering words that carried more fear than understanding. Elena had heard those whispers all her life. Apache, outsider, dangerous. She had believed them once. Now, she wasn't so sure what to believe. Stand straight, Clara Whitmore hissed beside her, adjusting Elena's sleeve with sharp, impatient fingers. You're fortunate anyone agreed to take you. Elena swallowed the bitterness rising in her throat. Her stepmother's voice always carried that same cold edge, as though kindness had long ago been carved out of her. There would be no comfort here, no reassurance. Only expectation, only obedience. Her father, Thomas Whitmore, stood near the front, speaking quietly with the officiant. His posture was rigid, his face drawn tight, not with sorrow, but with urgency. Debt had a way of hollowing a man out, replacing love with desperation. And Elena was the price he had chosen to pay. Her gaze drifted beyond the gathered crowd, scanning the distant horizon where the dirt road disappeared into open land. A foolish hope stirred within her chest, fragile but persistent. He might still come. Daniel Cross had promised her that. He had spoken of escape beneath starlit skies, his voice warm with certainty, his touch gentle and convincing. He had sworn she would never be forced into a life she did not choose. He had sworn he would stand beside her, no matter the cost. But promises were easy in the dark. Daylight had a way of revealing truth. Elena's heart tightened as the road remained empty. No horse, no figure riding hard to stop the ceremony. No salvation, only silence. Stop looking, Clara muttered. No one is coming. The words struck deeper than Elena expected, not because they were cruel, but because they were true. A faint breeze stirred, carrying dust across the ground as the officiant called for attention. The murmurs faded. The moment had arrived. Elena stepped forward. Each movement felt heavier than the last, as though her body resisted what her circumstances demanded. She could feel the weight of every eye upon her, judging, curious, indifferent. To them, this was not a tragedy. It was a solution. She dared a glance at Kai as she approached. He did not reach for her. He did not smile. But neither did he look triumphant. There was something else in his expression, something quieter, more restrained. Not pride, not ownership, something closer to reluctance. It unsettled her. The officiant began to speak, his voice steady but distant, the words blending into the hum of Elena's thoughts. She barely heard the vows, barely felt the passage of time. The world narrowed to the space between her and the man she was being bound to. When the moment came, she hesitated, just for a second. Her fingers tightened around the bouquet as doubt surged through her. This was the point of no return. A life decided not by love, but by circumstance. A future handed over like currency. She could still refuse. The thought flickered, brief, dangerous. But where would she go? Back to a house where she was no longer wanted? Into a world that offered no protection for a woman alone? Choice, she realized, had been taken from her long before this moment. Slowly, she extended her hand. Kai's gaze met hers for the first time. It was not harsh, not cold, just steady, grounded, as though he understood something she did not yet have words for. His hand closed around hers, not tightly, not possessively, but firmly enough to anchor her in place. The officiant finished the final words. "It is done." A quiet finality settled over the gathering. No applause followed. No celebration marked the union. The witnesses began to disperse, their interest fading as quickly as it had come. Elena stood there for a moment longer, her hand still in Kai's, her mind struggling to catch up with the reality that had just taken hold. She was no longer Elena Whitmore. She belonged to a different life now. Kai released her hand first. "Come," he said quietly. It was the first word she had heard him speak. Low, calm, without force. She followed him without protest, her steps uncertain as they moved away from the church, away from everything she had known. The sun dipped lower, stretching their shadows across the dust as they walked side by side, bound by a promise neither had chosen in the same way. Behind her, the town faded. Ahead, an unfamiliar path waited. And though fear still lingered in her chest, something else had begun to take shape beneath it. Not hope, not yet, but the faintest sense that the life she had been forced into might not unfold the way she had been taught to fear. As the last light of day slipped beyond the horizon, Elena realized one thing with quiet certainty. The true story of her marriage had not begun at the altar. It was only just beginning. The night of silence. The journey to Kai Redhawk's home was quiet, broken only by the rhythmic creak of the wagon and the distant hum of insects rising with the dusk. Elena sat stiffly beside him, her hands folded tightly in her lap, as though any movement might shatter what little control she had left. The town had long disappeared behind them, swallowed by distance and darkness. In its place stretched open land, vast, unyielding, and unfamiliar. The sky deepened into shades of violet and indigo, and with it came a growing unease that settled deep in Elena's chest. This was it. There would be no turning back now. She glanced sideways at Kai. His posture remained steady, his attention fixed ahead as he guided the horse along the narrow path. He had not spoken since they left the church. Not a word of instruction, not a word of reassurance. It felt strange, almost unsettling. She had expected something else. Demand, authority, ownership. Instead, there was only silence. After what felt like an endless stretch of road, a small structure came into view, barely visible in the fading light. It stood alone, surrounded by dry earth and sparse vegetation, its wooden frame worn but sturdy. Kai brought the wagon to a stop. "We're here," he said simply. His voice carried no weight of expectation, no hidden command. Just a statement of fact. Elena stepped down slowly, her legs unsteady beneath her. The air felt different here, quieter, heavier, as though the world itself had drawn a line between this place and everything she had known before. She followed him toward the house. Inside, the space was modest but orderly. A small table stood near the center, a lantern resting upon it, casting a soft, flickering glow across the room. There was no decoration, no attempt at comfort, only the essentials of a life built on necessity. Kai set the lantern down and turned to face her. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The silence stretched, thick with unspoken assumptions. Elena's breath caught slightly as reality pressed in. This was the moment she had feared, the moment every whisper in town had prepared her for. She braced herself, but Kai did not move closer. Instead, he gestured toward a small adjoining room. "You can sleep there," he said. Elena blinked, caught off guard. "And you?" she asked before she could stop herself. "I'll stay out here." His tone remained calm, unchanging, as though the arrangement required no further explanation. Confusion flickered through her fear. "That's not." She hesitated, unsure how to finish the thought. Not what she expected, not what she had been told. Kai met her gaze, his expression steady. "I won't force anything you don't choose," he said. The words settled over her like a sudden shift in wind. Unexpected, disorienting. Elena studied him carefully, searching for any sign of deception, any trace of hidden intent. But there was nothing in his face that matched the stories she had heard. No hunger, no cruelty, only restraint. "Why?" she asked quietly. It was a simple question, but it carried everything she did not understand. Kai looked away briefly, as though considering how much to say. "Because you didn't choose this," he replied at last. The honesty in his voice struck deeper than she anticipated. Elena felt something shift within her. Not trust, not yet, but the beginning of doubt. Doubt in everything she had been led to believe. She lowered her gaze, her fingers tightening around the fabric of her dress. "I thought," she began, then stopped. Kai didn't press her to continue. "I know what people say," he said instead. "About me. About men like me." There was no bitterness in his tone, just quiet acknowledgement. "They're wrong," Elena said softly, surprising even herself. The words slipped out before she could weigh them, before she could question why she felt compelled to defend him. Kai studied her for a moment, something unreadable passing through his expression. "Maybe," he said. He stepped back then, creating more space between them, as though determined to keep his distance. "There's water by the basin," he added. "And food, if you're hungry. Practical. Considerate. Nothing more." Elena nodded faintly, unsure how to respond. Kai moved toward the door, pausing only briefly before stepping outside. The sound of his boots faded into the night, leaving her alone in the dimly lit room. For the first time since the ceremony, Elena allowed herself to breathe. She sank slowly onto the edge of the narrow bed in the adjoining room, her thoughts racing in uneven currents. This was not what she had prepared for, not what she had feared. The danger she had braced herself against had not come. Instead, she was left with something far more unsettling. Kindness. Her gaze drifted toward the doorway, where the faint glow of the lantern reached into the shadows. Who was this man? And why did he treat her with more respect in a single moment than anyone in her past ever had? The question lingered as the night deepened around her. Outside, the wind whispered softly across the land, carrying with it a quiet stillness that felt almost unfamiliar. Elena lay back against the thin mattress, her body exhausted, but her mind unwilling to rest. She thought of her father, of Clara, of Daniel. A flicker of pain surfaced at his name, sharp and unresolved. He had promised her everything, and yet, when it mattered most, he had been nowhere. Her chest tightened, but this time the ache felt different, less like longing, more like realization. As sleep slowly began to claim her, one truth settled quietly into place. The man she had feared had shown her mercy, and the man she had trusted had not come at all. In the silence of that unfamiliar home, Elena understood something she had not allowed herself to see before. Perhaps the life she had lost was never truly hers to begin with. And perhaps the life she had been forced into held truths she had yet to uncover. The thought lingered in the darkness, quiet but persistent. A beginning hidden within an ending. The return of a promise. Morning arrived without ceremony. A pale light slipped through the thin window, settling gently across the small room where Elena lay awake, her eyes fixed on the ceiling. She had not slept deeply, but the restlessness that once gripped her had softened into something quieter, something watchful. For a moment, she forgot where she was. Then the stillness reminded her. The unfamiliar walls, the absence of tension, the silence that did not threaten. She sat up slowly, brushing a strand of hair from her face, her thoughts already beginning to gather. The memories of the night before lingered, not as fear, but as questions she could not yet answer. Kai had not crossed the threshold. He had kept his word. That alone unsettled everything she thought she understood about him. Elena stepped into the main room, her movements cautious but no longer rigid. The lantern had burned out, leaving only the natural light to fill the space. On the table sat a simple plate of bread and a small cup of water, untouched but clearly meant for her. He had thought of her before dawn. The realization stirred something unfamiliar in her chest, something fragile, hesitant to take shape. She reached for the bread, hesitating only briefly before taking a small bite. It was plain, but warm enough to suggest it had been prepared not long ago. Kai was awake. Outside, the faint sound of movement carried through the quiet air. Elena stepped toward the door, pausing as her hand hovered near the handle. A part of her still resisted stepping fully into this new life, as though crossing the threshold meant surrendering the last pieces of who she had been. But standing still would not change what had already been decided. She pushed the door open. Kai stood a short distance away, working the dry soil with steady, deliberate motions. The early light outlined his figure, casting long shadows across the land. He did not look up immediately, as though aware of her presence without needing to confirm it. For a moment, she simply watched him. There was no performance in his actions, no attempt to impress or assert control. Just quiet labor, honest, unembellished. "You should eat," he said, still focused on his work. "I did." A brief pause followed, not awkward but measured. Elena stepped closer, her gaze drifting across the land that now surrounded her. It was sparse, unforgiving in places, yet not entirely barren. Life existed here, but it required effort, patience, much like the man standing before her. "Why didn't you wake me?" she asked. "You needed rest." Simple, direct, no expectation attached. Elena folded her arms lightly, unsure of where to place herself in this conversation, or in this life. "I can help," she said after a moment. Kai finally looked up. His expression remained steady, but there was a flicker of something beneath it, surprise, perhaps, or quiet consideration. "You don't have to," he replied. "I know," she said, "but I want to." The words felt unfamiliar on her tongue. Want. It had been a long time since she had spoken from that place. Kai studied her for a moment longer, then gave a small nod. "Start with the water basin," he said. It was not a command. It was an invitation. Elena moved toward the task without hesitation, her hands finding purpose in the simplicity of the work. The cool water steadied her thoughts, grounding her in the present rather than the past. For a while, neither of them spoke. Yet the silence no longer felt heavy. It felt shared. Time passed quietly, marked only by the rhythm of effort and the slow rise of the sun. Elena found herself adjusting to the pace, to the absence of urgency, to the unexpected calm that settled over her. It almost felt peaceful. Almost. The distant sound of hooves broke that stillness. Both of them turned. A figure approached along the narrow path, riding with confidence that did not belong to this place. The horse moved quickly, cutting through the quiet with sharp, deliberate intent. Elena's breath caught before she could stop it. She knew that silhouette, even from a distance. Her pulse quickened, her hands instinctively tightening at her sides. No, it couldn't be. But as the rider drew closer, the truth became undeniable. Daniel Cross. He reined in his horse just short of the property, his gaze sweeping across the land before settling on her. A familiar smile touched his lips, charming, practiced, as though no time had passed at all. "Elena," he called. Her name sounded different in his voice now. Not comforting, not certain, just distant. She took a step forward before she could think better of it, drawn by instinct, by memory, by everything she had once believed. "You came," she said, the words leaving her more as a question than a statement. Daniel dismounted smoothly, brushing dust from his coat as though the journey had been effortless. "Of course I did," he replied. "Did you really think I'd stay away?" Something in his tone didn't sit right. Too easy, too rehearsed. Elena hesitated, the flicker of hope she had carried for so long now colliding with something sharper, something more cautious. Behind her, Kai remained still, watching, saying nothing. Daniel's eyes shifted briefly toward him, his smile tightening just enough to reveal the edge beneath it. "So this is where they sent you," he said, his voice lowering slightly. "I should have come sooner." Elena felt the weight of those words settle uneasily within her. Should have. Not tried to. Not fought to. A subtle difference, but one she could not ignore. "Why didn't you?" she asked quietly. Daniel's expression faltered, only for a second, but it was enough. The silence stretched between them, filled with everything that had been left unsaid. For the first time, Elena did not rush to fill it. For the first time, she waited. And as she stood there, caught between the man she once loved and the man she did not yet understand, a realization began to take root. Not all returns were meant to restore what was lost. Some were meant to reveal why it had been lost in the first place. Daniel took a step closer. "Elena," he said again, softer now. "We need to talk." She didn't move, didn't answer. Behind her, the quiet presence of Kai remained steady, unchanging, unintrusive. And somehow, that silence spoke louder than anything Daniel had said. Elena drew a slow breath, her heart no longer racing, but sharpening. The past had found her, but this time she would not meet it blindly. As the tension thickened in the morning light, one truth settled firmly in her mind. Whatever came next would not be decided by promises. It would be decided by truth, and she was finally ready to hear it. The choice that remains. The morning air held its breath. Elena stood between two lives, one she had once dreamed of and one she had never chosen. The space between Daniel Cross and Kai Redhawk felt wider than the land stretching beyond them, filled with unspoken truths that demanded to be faced. Daniel stepped closer, his boots pressing into the dry earth with practiced ease. He carried himself the same way he always had, confident, assured, as though the world would bend if he simply willed it to. "Elena," he said again, softer now, as if gentleness might recover what time had eroded. "You don't belong here." The words lingered in the air, familiar in tone, but hollow in weight. Elena studied him carefully, her gaze no longer softened by memory. She noticed what she had once overlooked, the careful choice of words, the way his eyes flickered, not with concern, but calculation. "And where do I belong?" she asked. Daniel smiled faintly, as though the answer were obvious. "With me." It was the same promise, dressed in the same certainty. But something had changed. Elena felt it in the quiet steadiness of her own heartbeat. "You didn't come for me," she said, her voice calm but unyielding. "Not when it mattered." A shadow crossed Daniel's face, brief but unmistakable. "I had to be careful," he replied quickly. "Your father, he made it difficult. I needed time to arrange things." "Time," Elena repeated, the word settling heavily between them. She glanced briefly at Kai. He had not moved. He had not spoken. Yet his presence anchored the moment in a way Daniel's words could not disturb. Elena turned back. "I waited," she continued. "I believe you would come before this happened, before I was handed over like something to be traded." Daniel's expression tightened. "And now I'm here," he insisted. "That's what matters." "No." The realization came quietly, but it was absolute. That was not what mattered. "What matters," Elena said, her voice gaining strength, "is that you weren't." The truth landed between them, heavier than accusation. For the first time, Daniel seemed uncertain. "You don't mean that," he said, his tone shifting, a trace of impatience breaking through. "You're upset. Of course you are. But this," he gestured dismissively toward the land, toward the house, toward Kai without fully looking at him. "This isn't your life." Elena followed the motion of his hand. For a brief moment, she saw it through his eyes, simple, lacking, far from the comfort she had once known. But that view felt distant now, incomplete. "You don't know what my life is," she said. Daniel let out a quiet breath, as though trying to steady himself. "I know you," he replied. "I know what you deserve. And it's not this." Still, he did not ask what she wanted. Still, he spoke as though her path had already been decided. The realization sharpened into something undeniable. "You're not here for me," Elena said slowly. Daniel frowned. "Of course I am." "No," she continued, her voice unwavering now. "You're here because you don't like losing." The word struck deeper than any accusation she had made before. For a moment, Daniel said nothing. And in that silence, Elena found her answer. His gaze flickered again, briefly, instinctively, toward Kai. Not with curiosity, not with concern, but with something closer to rivalry. That was when she understood. This had never been about saving her. It had been about control, about pride, about reclaiming something he believed had been taken from him. Elena stepped back. The movement was small, but it shifted everything. Daniel noticed. "Elena," he said, a note of urgency creeping into his voice. "Don't do this. You don't have to stay here. Come with me. We can leave now." "Leave?" The word once would have filled her with relief. Now, it only raised a question. Leave for what? For promises that had already been broken? For a future built on uncertainty and half-truths? She turned slightly, her gaze finding Kai once more. He stood as he always had, quiet, composed, offering nothing but presence. He had never asked her to stay, never tried to convince her. And yet, he had given her something no one else had. Choice. Real choice. Elena faced Daniel again. I'm not going with you, she said. The words felt steady. Certain. Final. Daniel stared at her, disbelief giving way to frustration. You can't be serious. I am. His jaw tightened. You're choosing this? No. Elena replied softly. I'm choosing myself. The distinction hung in the air, clear and unshakable. For the first time, Daniel had no immediate response. No charm to rely on. No promise strong enough to undo what had already been revealed. This isn't over, he said finally, though the certainty in his voice had thinned. Elena did not answer. She didn't need to. Some endings did not require words. Daniel mounted his horse with sharp, controlled movements, his departure lacking the confidence of his arrival. Without another glance, he turned and rode back the way he had come, the sound of hooves fading into the distance. Silence returned, but it was no longer uncertain. It was resolved. Elena stood still for a moment, watching the empty path where her past had just disappeared. She expected to feel something stronger, grief, regret, doubt. Instead, there was only clarity, a quiet, grounding sense of release. She turned slowly. Kai remained where he was, his expression unchanged, as though he had anticipated nothing and demanded nothing. You didn't say anything, Elena said. It wasn't my place, he replied. His answer was simple, but it carried more respect than any promise she had ever been given. Elena took a step closer, then another. Each movement felt deliberate, chosen, not forced, not expected. I stayed, she said, not as a question, but as a truth she was still learning to understand. Kai met her gaze. Yes, he said. No triumph, no claim, just acknowledgement. Elena let out a slow breath, the weight of everything she had carried finally beginning to lift. This life was still uncertain, still unfamiliar, but it was hers to shape now. And as she stood there, no longer divided between past and present, she realized something she had never fully grasped before. The greatest change had not come from the man she married. It had come from the choice she made after. The wind moved softly across the land, carrying with it the quiet promise of something new. And for the first time, Elena did not look back.